This week, provincial and territorial premiers will descend on Montreal for what could be a tense standoff. That's when the Prime Minister will host a First Ministers meeting. Trade was expected to drive the discussion, but now the premiers of Alberta and Saskatchewan have written Justin Trudeau a letter requesting another item be added to the agenda: Canada's record low oil prices.
It should have been on the agenda all along, to be quite honest. There was a lot of stuff about internal trade, and at these meetings we tend to have conversations about minor internal trade issues, and then when it's my opportunity to talk, I say, well, there's this big internal trade issue that we have about getting our product from one province to another and to other markets, and it's actually worth 100 times the value of these other issues.
The Prime Minister's office says the issue will be addressed at this week's meeting during a general discussion about jobs and the economy. Alberta will likely renew its call for federal help. So what should Ottawa be doing to relieve the oil industry? Joining me from the House of Commons foyer is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Infrastructure, Marco Mendicino, Conservative infrastructure critic Matt Genereux, and NDP finance critic Peter Julian. Hello to all three of you, and thank you for your patience. I appreciate it.
Good to be here.
Mr. Mendicino, I'll start with you. Why didn't the Prime Minister make the crisis in Alberta top of the agenda for this meeting?
Well, let me begin by saying that the First Minister's meeting is an excellent opportunity to talk about Canada's excelling economy. Over 500,000 jobs created since we took the reins in 2015. We've got secured trade deals with every corner of the world and all of our G7 partners. And of course, energy was always and is going to be part of that discussion. So the issues that have been raised by both Alberta and Saskatchewan are vitally important to this discussion. I know the Prime Minister is looking forward to having it. You know, under Stephen Harper, the Conservatives never wanted to hold these First Ministers meetings. We're proud to be doing it because we know that by cooperating and collaborating, we're going to continue to excel as a country.
I got to ask you about what I imagine a lot of people in Alberta, when they listen to you say we're going to talk about the excelling economy, feel might be a bit of tone, a kind of a tone-deaf attitude. When you talk about the crisis in Alberta, that's not talking about the excelling economy.
Well, look, I mean, we feel the pain, and we've got members of our caucus who represent Alberta with a lot of pride. Minister Sohi gets up and he stands up in the House and he talks very passionately about representing his constituents and the people of Alberta. And when they hurt, we all hurt. We need to do right by them, and we are going to continue to invest in the energy sector by doing things like approving the Line 3 extension, by continuing to pursue the Trans Mountain Pipeline in the right way, including in consulting with First Nations. It was good to see the Prime Minister at the AFN conference taking those questions. That's what we mean by the right way. And by seeing that we move forward with the LNG investment. That's how we're going to get oil to foreign markets. When Stephen Harper had the reins of power, we got 1%. 1% of all of our oil to foreign markets. We're going to see to it that we expand that number.
Mr. Genereux, can I ask you, what more can the federal government actually do? They are calling it a crisis. They're redoing consultations on TMX. They've paid for the pipeline. They say they're considering contributing to the rail option. But when I asked Premier Notley what would the specific ask be, she didn't have a specific answer. So what specifically would you like the federal government more to do?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, Vashi. And Albertans are getting sick and tired of the same rhetoric that we're hearing from Marco here, in terms of that our heart is with you, or we feel your compassion. You know, there's 2,000 people in the streets of Calgary when the Prime Minister came to speak at the Chamber of Commerce, and those are people who are out of work. Those are people who are at the food bank, who won't be able to have the same Christmas that they had last year, and they're begging and pleading with the Prime Minister to do a variety of things, to kill Bill C-69, to finally get the pipeline built, end the moratorium and the tanker ban, the carbon tax. They're asking him to put actions to words in showing what truly Albertans really want is a Prime Minister that's fighting on their side, and right now we don't have that.
But isn't putting $4.5 billion into buying a pipeline showing that kind of action?
Vashi, I'm glad you bring that up, because if you remember back in the day, they were very much forced to buy that pipeline when Kinder Morgan pulled out of that pipeline because of the issues that they put forward in the energy sector.
They could have let it die.
Well, yes, and which essentially they did at the end of the day. When they had to come in and swoop in with the Alberta new infrastructure minister, natural resources minister, saying, you know what, we're gonna save you, Alberta. We're gonna buy this pipeline. What have they done since then? We're still in the same situation we're at.
Well, they are reconsulting.
We have this Bill C-69, which we are begging and pleading with the government the No More Pipelines bill to end immediately, and they still stand up in the House and say, you know what, our heart is with Albertans, and it's again, getting sick and tired of hearing the same old sentiment from this government.
Mr. Julian, your party is against buying TMX. What's your position on a federal contribution to rail cars?
One of the reasons why we're opposed to the $4.5 billion purchase of Kinder Morgan, which was far beyond the asset value, is the fact that that same amount of money put into clean energy would be putting thousands of energy workers in Alberta back to work. Now, I'm one of the few members of Parliament that have actually been ankle deep in oil because I used to work at the now closed Shelburne oil refinery in Burnaby, BC. And one of the things we can learn from this is the price differential doesn't have an impact on integrated oil companies. So when you talk about Husky,
and yet they're being punished by the production cuts right now.
Well, when those companies are having significant profits, and the reality is, when you talk about integrated oil companies, when you talk about upgrading and refining, the price differential doesn't have the same impact. So the federal government should be doing a lot more to invest in clean energy in Alberta, and that helps energy workers, and also look at the upgrading and refining alternatives as well. That would make a real difference. But instead we have, as with Oshawa, a federal Liberal government that is missing in action.
So you're not supportive of any federal contribution to moving more oil by rail?
We don't believe that the answer is exporting raw bitumen. We do believe that value added is the way to go, and not just in the energy sector. When we look at forestry and we look at mining as well, Canada is hemorrhaging jobs in part because we export raw product rather than looking at the options that create more jobs here in Canada.
Mr. Mendicino, Mr. Generou brought up Bill C-69. There are a lot of people in the industry. There are the energy minister, the governments, I guess I should say, of Alberta and Saskatchewan are hoping that your government kills this bill, not necessarily against the intent of it to sort of have another go and make more certain the regulatory process under which big projects like pipelines are approved, but because of the timing of it and the potential uncertainty it will create in the midst of this crisis in Alberta. Is your government open to killing this bill?
Of course not, because it's absolutely imperative that we keep our COP21 commitments so that we can reduce GHG emissions and that we hit those all-important targets. And by the way, industry leaders like the CEO for Suncor and others within the oil patch have been very supportive of putting a price on pollution. So we've got.
I'm talking about Bill C-69.
I know. Well, so what I'm saying to you is that this is an important piece of legislation that is going to be part of the conversation at the First Minister's meeting. And yes, other issues like price differential will be raised, the rail option will be raised, and we need to have those discussions so that we are able to support our energy sector. But we can't do it at the expense of the environment, and that's why the two have to go hand in hand, as you hear our government say time and time again. Is
there, though, Mr. Mendicino, cause for a bit of a pause, on Bill C-69, just given the situation in Alberta? Does it need to happen right now? I take your point about the environmental aspect of it and the certainty that needs to be created. But if all of these voices and stakeholders are saying this is the wrong way to do it, does your government need to press pause?
We feel this is a good piece of legislation. We feel it's been based on a thorough and rigorous consultation, including with industry leaders within the energy sector, and that this First Minister's meeting will allow Premier Notley and Premier Moe to put on the agenda the very specific issues which have been referred to by my friends, and that includes price differential. But what's most important is that when it comes to the barrel of oil, we get the full value of it, and we hear Albertans when they talk about that. And it isn't just rhetoric. We have people who feel very passionately about this, and I would, take to task Matt Generou here, who doesn't think that Mr. Sohi's being very sincere when he stands up and he's defending them. This is a government that sees Alberta as part of Canada, and we are stronger together when we have First Ministers meetings like this.
Mr. Generou, the item is on the agenda now. It will be discussed. Isn't that enough?
Vashti, what does it take to get this on the agenda? It took two premiers to write the Prime Minister.
Just a letter.
To draw attention to it. Like he was in Calgary just a couple weeks ago and saw those 2,000 unemployed energy workers outside of the Hyatt in Calgary. Does that?
He called it a crisis, though. To be fair, the Prime Minister did say it was a crisis.
I believe he put his hand over his heart when he did it too, Vashti. But what? Again, Albertans are sick and tired of hearing these things from Ottawa and, quite frankly, from the Liberals like Amarjeet Sohi, and want action at the end of the day. And to say that they're not going to pause Bill C-69, they're going to ram it through the Senate now, is just more rhetoric from this government that they really don't consider the energy sector a partner, and quite frankly, Alberta and Saskatchewan.
Mr. Julian, final word to you. What's your thoughts on Bill C-69? Do you think the government needs to press pause?
No, the government needs to put in place the commitments that actually meet Canada's international obligations. And so how do you do that? Well, we have resources, and the federal government is misusing them by buying a pipeline rather than investing in clean energy resources, for example, in Alberta, to assure that transition strategy. As the building trades have noted, over the next decade in the United States, the clean energy market is going to quadruple. And so there's a tremendous amount of potential. We could be putting energy workers back to work, but the federal government needs to be making the investments and needs to be putting in place a real transition strategy. I do not see that from the federal Liberals.
Okay, I have to leave it there. I'm out of time, but thank you so much to all three of you. Thanks to Marco Medicino, Matt Generou, and Peter Julian.